大家好, I'm Nathan Rich, aka 火锅大王. You know, there's been an increasingly heated debate in America. Does a college education make one smarter and more competent? Or is a degree just a certificate in memorization? Can someone be smart without college? Can someone be incompetent with fancy degrees? Well, the discussion continues, but I've found evidence that people with a good education can be irresponsible, misleading, and unprofessional. I'm talking, of course, about a recent academic paper that proved Huawei is directed by the Chinese government. When I was in school, no one would have picked me as the cool guy. As life went on, though, I cared less and less about cool. It just escaped my thoughts. But some people sort of went the other way. They clearly never cared about how they looked or being cool, but then later in their life, they cared more and more. Christopher Balding is one of those people. You know, the guy who conducted serious scientific research that proved once and for all that Huawei is being run by the Chinese government. But what else do we know about him? He works at the Fulbright University in Vietnam. According to him, he's considered to be one of the leading experts on the Chinese economy and financial markets. That's what he wrote on his bio page here. How do I know he wrote it? You see, his writing is easy to recognize. In this bio, he's done things a middle school student wouldn't get away with. Like here where he forgot a word. There are many more issues, but it's not just his poor writing skills that stands out. Notice his very unique, strange use of commas. He tends to toggle between using commas in the normal way and using them very minimally. So minimally, in fact, he drags sentences out to the ends of the earth. Or he breaks sentences. He doesn't seem to really get how commas work. One pass from anyone with a critical eye would have spotted these errors. He hasn't even bothered to closely check his own public representation of himself. Or he did check it, but he's unable to critically evaluate details. That's important. His strengths, he says, include unrivaled data knowledge. He's a leading expert on the Chinese economy and financial markets. Well, it turns out that Christopher has been very busy outside of screwing up his bio. In 2012, he began Anti-Chinese Blogging on his website. Much like his idol Gordon P. Chang, over the years he's maintained a constant stream of doomsday prophecies. China's always just about to fail, but for some strange reason it never does. His earliest post is a vague accusation that everyone knows who is ultimately responsible for hacking his account. Oh, and notice the lack of commas. He wrote many pessimistic articles about China. He slammed nearly everything about the country. And in 2018, he shocked both of his readers when he announced he was leaving China. The school he was working at didn't renew his contract, so he wrote a very long article blaming Chinese government for his job performance. His poor writing comes out again. Missing spaces, double spaces, missing words, the misuse of words. The first time I read this, I thought it was an April Fool's joke. He wrote it April 1st, and there's just no way a college professor could have written this. It's too sloppy, too unkempt. In the manifesto, he ironically thanks several people who have tirelessly worked to improve my writing and more concise. Oh, God, the irony. He literally cannot write a correct sentence as he's praising other people for helping him with his writing. But there's one recurring theme in this babbling, sloppy mess. He hates communism. He hates the Chinese government. And then he rambles about how China is so dangerous, he decided to leave the country. See how he did that? He got fired, but suddenly somehow he's the one who's decided to leave. And then he just goes on and on and on, guys. I mean, just imagine someone committing some horrible crime and we find the manifesto he wrote. That's what this thing reads like. There is no point here, but again, the main theme is that he hates communism. And that's what he wrote before he got the hell away from communism forever. That's right, he's a man of integrity. So he moved to Vietnam. Okay, so far we have a guy who was fired. Then he went to Vietnam where he wrote what he thought was an impressive bio about himself. And he's been itching to get back at China ever since that firing. There's plenty of evidence of that. His Twitter stream is one anti-China tweet after another as far back as you care to look. He's written lots of Bloomberg articles too. And what do you know? Every single one of them is anti-China. All of them are China negative, China bad, 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 China bad. But let's back up. I'm sure there are people out there who say the opposite about me. Nathan, that handsome devil, he's just pro-China. The truth, of course, is that I focus on positive things by nature. I tend to ignore frivolous negative things, especially if they're over-reported. The point is this: who cares if he's obviously anti-China in every single thing that he does? The question is he right? Take a look at the first reply to his manifesto. Look at how it begins. Your predictions and criticisms of China's economy and government proved consistently wrong. Oh my God, that's messed up. I mean, we're talking about a self-professed expert in the Chinese economy, and he's immediately called out for consistently being wrong about the Chinese economy. That's enough to make any manifesto-writing, illiterate, out-of-work China hater seek opportunity for further revenge. And earlier this year, the opportunity came. In April 2019, he published a research paper reflective of his inattention to detail. But more interesting than his sloppiness was his desperation to paint anything Chinese as the worst thing ever. This paper is called Who Owns Huawei? I'm not going to go through this whole incredibly misleading document, but I will give you a quick example just to get you started. It took me 1 second to find this. Want to see how misleading scientific research can be? Here it says, it is possible that the United States government has convinced the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Corps that there is at least probable cause to consider some Huawei entities as foreign powers or agents of a foreign power. Let me translate this drivel into human language for you. He's saying maybe the government convinced a court there's evidence they should think of something having to do with Huawei as a foreign power. Wow, that sounds so solid, I didn't think to myself. Instead, I simply started looking into the claim. This is a snapshot of the website he got this claim from. So this is exactly what Christopher saw as it was the day he saw it. The first thing in the article that, again, he saw is a notice making it clear that there is an alternate and, quote, much less intriguing explanation. Weird, I didn't see anything about that in Christopher's research paper. It says here actually that this could have been based on one single person from the government having literally any kind of communication with Huawei. This entire thing could have been from one person who had nothing to do with Huawei at all. Why is Balding making enormous assumptions, hiding critical caveats, and misleading his readers? I mean, he knows how data works. He's an unrivaled expert, remember? After this report came out, Western media ate it up. Confident people were too stupid, naive, or lazy to check actual sources. After all, he's a trusted researcher, for some reason. I mean, the conclusion of his study is literally that he doesn't understand how Huawei is governed. Overnight, he was a celebrity. Finally, the cool guy, the talk of the town. He had escaped communism in China to totally non-communist Vietnam, and he had his sights set on getting revenge. When Huawei became a talking point, he used his education and connections to hobble together a hit piece against them. Balding got comfortable with his newfound stardom, but sadly, holding on to that stardom proved as difficult for him as writing a cohesive paragraph. And soon he decided to release another research paper. This one, though, is even worse than the first. He sent a shockwave throughout the internet, but even the most fervent anti-Huawei columnist out there started to notice something was off with this report. Huawei Technologies links to Chinese state security. He puts his university here, so we know that this is an official paper. Let's see. This paper analyzes the relationship between key Huawei personnel and the Chinese state security services. Wow, that's intense. He says there is strong evidence that Huawei personnel act at the direction of Chinese state intelligence. Holy wow! This is going to be seriously well backed up scientific data coming, guys. This is it, the big one. Prepare to get a master class in research papers by notable China expert and unrivaled data master Christopher Balding, PhD. This should raise questions within Western governments worried about Chinese access to domestic information. Wait, I'm sorry. What the hell is this? You're making policy recommendations and a virtue signal in a scientific paper? Okay, maybe that was just his bias seeping through. The rest is sound science. Let's go. He thanks many people. So this was clearly a very big research team. Good, because the bar for proof on this kind of extremely consequential claim is super high. Introduction, blah, blah, blah. Weird use or misuse of commas, just like in the bio he wrote about himself. Here we go. So for this study, he's using a bunch of leaked resumes. Okay, are these resumes of people who work at Huawei or people applying to Huawei? He doesn't say. He just moves right past the data description. Here he says, this will be a series of papers. There's just too much solid evidence, apparently. And suddenly it's the conclusion already. Key mid-level technical personnel employed by Huawei have strong backgrounds in work closely associated with intelligence gathering and military activities. What? Did you catch that? Everything was clear. Then suddenly the sentences became so foggy that they nearly faded away. Think of any job and then ask yourself, is there a way to use it for intelligence gathering? Is there? Surprise, you're officially being directed by the government of China, according to this paper so far. Huawei personnel can be linked at a metadata level to specific instances of hacking. Wow, that's bad. You know what linked at a metadata level means? Nothing. It means nothing at all. Okay, let's see. The research presented in this paper is highly sensitive, etc., etc. He's got a bunch of resumes, he says, and he's presenting 3 of them in such a way as to prevent anyone from replicating the research I have undertaken. Did you hear what I just said? He is intentionally obfuscating the data source so as to prevent reproducibility. He is ending the scientific method as of this sentence. No one anywhere can see the data or verify it. Now, for the rest of the paper, everyone in the world has to simply trust him. Then he says he's edited the data but won't tell us what edits he made, including omitting key data. I mean, there is literally no point to continue. This is not an academic paper. This is not a research paper. This is a list of opinions based on obfuscated dark magic. But I owe it to you, dear subscriber, to continue, and so I will, even though this guy has literally just told us it's all anti-scientific. How does he get away with this? I mean, this document is filled with phrases like this one. Quote, based on unpublished information. What? Then he tells us he violated Chinese law by obtaining leaked data. So he not only hates China, he's also now a criminal in China, according to him. Good job, bro. He says he went through 600 million resumes and found some amount of them that have something to do with Huawei and something to do with the government. Then he clearly and openly admits, quote, it is difficult to know how representative a sample the CV data are relative to Huawei. Exactly, and that is the point. You're just picking some tiny amount of resumes that apparently say what you want them to from a huge pile. Oh, dear God, this is the worst use of data I have ever seen. Ever. This guy understands nothing about data. Then this absolutely ludicrous excuse out of paper goes on to tell us about 3 supposed resumes. They have been altered in ways we cannot know, and we cannot check the data. No one anywhere can even verify that they exist at all. The first one says there's a guy who tests software at Huawei, and he's also a teacher at one of the top 4 universities in China, a military academy. Huh? Oh, I'm sorry, were you waiting for more? That's it. That's the big scary proof from the first resume. The guy is a teacher in a military university, and he also tests software in Huawei. No, I'm not kidding. That's literally all this anti-China, anti-science report says so far. Then Christopher says the resume does not say the guy works under something called the SSF, but that he believes the guy's work is clearly under the SSF umbrella. Are you being serious right now? Then he goes on a long babbling rant about some SSF unit, which he literally just told us the resume doesn't mention or indicate in any way. And this, people, this is the so-called evidence of someone being linked at a metadata level to specific instances of hacking. That's right. The evidence is that even though there is no evidence, Christopher believes it's true. Did I mention in the current global climate this is horrifyingly unprofessional and irresponsible? He wraps up the first resume by saying, evidence appears quite strong to support valid concerns about the relationship between Huawei, the PLA, and concerns about intelligence gathering. No, it doesn't. It doesn't appear strong. It appears that there is evidence a guy has a part-time job teaching at a top university. That's it. Everything else you said is your own biased drivel. You've presented no evidence for anything you just claimed. And even if you had provided evidence, you admitted to altering the data and also to getting it illegally. Is anyone else seeing this? Next resume. A guy was working as a representative for Huawei, and he dealt with something called the MSS in China, which is apparently like the CIA or FBI. Okay, so what? Every single large tech company in the world needs to deal with the government inspections and interfacing. All of them. Google, Apple, Cisco, Facebook, Microsoft, all of them. There's nothing strange going on here, so what's your point? Oh, here we go, more speculation. You are guessing here. You literally just said that. And here, next to where you wrote the wrong word and then didn't notice it when you allegedly checked your work, you say he's following the laws of China when it comes to interception technologies. Every government does interception on traffic. All of them. Again, you keep talking about this stuff like it's evidence of something. It isn't. Let me clarify how this works for people who don't understand. Let's say I'm the president of Nathanistan. I can buy Huawei equipment. And when I do so, I will tell them to do this or that with their equipment, to adhere to my Nathanistan laws. That has nothing to do with Huawei and everything to do with the customer. Countries have laws. And if, for example, I want to sell a car in America, I have to install a seatbelt on it. If I manufacture networking equipment for the US government, I will have to add tracing software, port mirrors, and backdoors, for example. Because that's what they want. And that's why every major technology company has to do this for the United States government. Look, Balding, I know you have zero technical knowledge, and now we all know you have zero data knowledge. That's obvious from this little paper you've written. But the annoying thing is you're taking advantage of your readers' ignorance of tech. You are being manipulative and misleading. No one anywhere cares if Huawei has versions of their products in China that adhere to domestic Chinese communications laws. And yet you're pretending that means something. You're pretending that this alleged data that shows someone worked as an interface with the government somehow proves that Huawei works for the government. But you've provided zero proof. You just keep showing some tiny little thing and then pontificating on it. This is not research. Then, and I'm being serious here, Christopher Balding, PhD, says that while he has no proof at all, this guy worked in a region of China during a time period that someone in Europe reported being hacked from that region. My God, Balding, you've solved the mystery. Oh, how many people are there in China anyway? Like 7? Please, God, let me be done with this article. It's so bad. One more. The third one is a guy who did networking at various companies. And the big evidence against him? He listed his proficiencies as including Cisco and Nortel switches. If you're waiting for more, sorry, this guy who does networking knows networking. You know, I'm also an expert with switches, Christopher. I've done hundreds of technical interviews. I can sniff out who actually understands VLANs and who only understands the abstracted Cisco versions. If a candidate starts using terms like access mode and trunk mode, you've got to dig in deeper to make sure he understands the difference between tagged and untagged VLAN ports. But you know what, Balding? I'm supposed to know that because at one time in my life I was a network administrator. Just like this guy you're talking about. Actually knowing how to do your job isn't a bad thing, Balding. Maybe you should try it sometime. Then Christopher claims that because this guy had previously worked in China's version of NASA, somehow that's proof that, quote, we can conclusively say that key Huawei personnel have close relationships with Chinese military. I cannot believe that the Fulbright University in Vietnam hired this person as anything but a janitor. I cannot believe that this person is accepted in any academic circles. He's an incompetent, biased, misleading, and dishonest person. Fulbright University in Vietnam. Dishonest. Unprofessional. Of course, the media ran with his insane guesswork, but the academic community did not. The paper was widely condemned, with such feedback as, it's feeding a corrosive and toxic narrative that damages our community. That's by someone called Mike Gao, another academic. He seems to be sympathetic with Balding's cause, whatever it is, and yet he still points out the dozens of unethical, unscientific things Balding did. We actually find many honorable academics slamming Balding. So many, in fact, that he responded to the outrage on his little blog. In the response, he says things like, quote, "This paper is not an academic paper, and I never said it was." No, I'm not making that up. He's pretending now that the paper he clearly presented as an academic one, that he published on an academic website, is an academic? And with all the unethical and misleading information in it, in a way he's right. It isn't academic. It's political. Like I always say, I don't care if you like China. I really don't. But if you're going to go out there in public and start attacking it, you better be honest about what you're saying. You better back it up with facts. And when I see someone hiding behind a PhD, doing his best to publicly shame a Chinese company out of his own sense of revenge, I get upset. He's taking advantage of people who don't understand technology. He's taking advantage of people who can't see what he did is not research. And the news agencies that ran with it are almost as bad. Well, Balding, you fooled the world into thinking you understood data, into thinking that you were smart. For a while there, you were cool. You convinced someone that PhD meant something. But to me, I don't know anymore. Thanks, everyone. 谢谢.